everyone, and a massive welcome to, I believe, the 16th episode of the CISO Experience. My name's Simon Lindstead. I'm the host and founder of the InfoSec Live community, and as usual, we have a very exciting show for you lined up today. But before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping as usual for those who've watched before. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy our content. I've actually got a little bit of an announcement and a little jig on the spot to do, because whilst Brian and I were in the back of the studio a couple of moments ago, we've hit 1,000 subscribers for the first time. So a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in and subscribed. I've no idea what that means, really. I know that my 13-year-old son, who wants to be a YouTuber, will be thoroughly annoyed that Dad's done that before him. So it's a win for me. And if anyone else knows what it means, please do drop in the chat. And that leads me on to my next comment, which is we do like these to be as live and interactive as possible. It's always more exciting when the tribe of you watching jump in the chat and ask questions. So please do that. And for those of you watching on the replay, make sure you also drop in the comments what you've enjoyed, what you haven't enjoyed, and also, of course, any ideas for improvement. And before we jump into the show, a couple of things left to do. First, for anyone who doesn't know who InfoSec Live are, InfoSec Live was founded by myself last June as a not-for-profit community to help those in the cybersecurity industry. It's an independent social network now of 3,000 cyber professionals, all sharing best ideas and practice in what I believe is the world's first dedicated security social network. And this new series is here. Well, not new so much anymore. I need to change my type there. This thoroughly ingrained series is here to help by continuing the theme in our community of sharing best ideas and practice, addressing the challenges out there and discussing all important successes too. And the only reason this show is possible is thanks to the support of our show sponsor, Bramfit Technology Labs. So before we welcome our next guest, a little bit about them. Bramfit are an international cybersecurity consultancy leading the way in innovation and cyber resilience. Their entire team is owned and managed and works on a linear structure, drawing expertise from the military, government, finance, and technology industry, based in Perth, Australia, London, UK, and New York in the US. Together, they provide support and collaboration to those who protect company assets and sensitive data, and leading the way in technical consulting focused on embedding a culture of security with its clients. And my favorite quote from the CEO there, Lewis, who's very hands-on the technical side as well. If you're a CISO suffering from Big Four fatigue, reach out to Bramfit today to see how they can help. So massive thanks to Bramfit for making this possible. Now, on to our next very, very exciting guest. So we've got another awesome CISO lined up for you today. Today, it's Brian Contos, who's the Chief Security Officer at Phosphorus Cybersecurity. With 2 IPOs, 8 acquisitions, Brian's helped build some of the most successful security companies in the world. Over 25 years in the industry as a security company entrepreneur, board advisor, investor, and author. And after getting his start with the Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA, and later Bell Labs, he began the process of building security startups and taking multiple companies through successful IPOs and acquisitions, including Riptech, ArcSight, Imperva, McAfee, Solera Networks, Cylance, JASK, Verodin, and Mandiant. And Brian's worked in over 50 countries across 6 continents, authored the book Enemy at the Water Cooler. Haven't read that, Brian, must put that on my list. And co-authored another book, Physical Logical Security Convergence, with the former NSA Deputy Director William Crowell. Featured in the cyber war documentary Five Eyes alongside General Michael Hayden, former NSA and CIA director. And he's also written for and been interviewed by Security and Business Press, and regularly presents at conferences worldwide like Black Hat, RSA, and B-Sides. And to say I'm excited to speak to you, Brian, is an understatement. So without further rambling from me, which we all know I'm very good at, let's play a stinger and bring Brian on. Hey, Brian.
Hey, Simon, how are you? Lucky number 16. I'm glad I helped you.
No, it must be you, Brian. The last 2 days, I mean, we've gradually got subscribers on a trickle, I suppose, over the last, about 9 months now, we've been putting regular content out there. But the last 2 days, we've had 100 subscribers, which when we've only got 1,000 now is massive. So it's bow down to Brian, I think, for coming on the show.
Thank you. Congratulations. That's a testament to the show's quality. So happy to be part of this, for sure.
Thank you. And just quickly before we start, just a quick hello to everyone in the chat. We've got Splodge, Greg, Johnny, Paul Cummings from Whole Cyber Human Initiative, Johnny Gill from Bramfit Technology Labs, and my friend Siegfried there at the bottom. Again, everyone, thanks for jumping in. This is what makes it awesome. And Brian, I'm now going to try and shut up, which I find very difficult, and ask you to start off by elaborating a little bit on, I suppose, all the massive achievements you've had over the past 25 years. Can we start at the beginning? Is that okay?
Yeah. That was such a detailed bio. It was almost like my mom talking to her friends.
But I bet she's proud.
So yeah, so I've been doing this for a really long time, over a couple decades. I started out in Fort Huachuca in Arizona, at an army basis, Fort Huachuca, with DISA, working in the cyber warfare group. Uh, After that, I took a job with Bell Labs. I moved to Brazil. I kind of wanted to get away for a while. And after that, I just started building startups. My first startup was Riptech, and that was with folks like Amit Yaran and Elad Yaran, Grant Geyer, some folks that I met at Bell Labs, a bunch of folks that came out of West Point that I had known. And we got together and we started at MSSP. At which point I was like, "Well, what the heck's an MSSP?" And we started monitoring people's security solutions, and it was great. And we ended up selling it to Symantec, and we are all going to go sit on islands, and we were in our early 20s. We didn't know what we were going to do afterwards, and just relax. And 2 weeks after that, I joined a little startup called ArcSight, which was about 5 people at the time, pre-customers, and did that. We took that public, and then the hook was set. I said, this is all I want to do for the rest of my career is build cybersecurity startups. And after that, I went to Imperva. And as you mentioned, I've written a couple books. My last book was with William Crowell. He was the former deputy director of the NSA. So I've done a lot of work with the three-letter agencies, both in the US and abroad. But it's been great, just sort of working in different fields, whether it's MSSP, the SIM space, web application firewalls, and data access management, deep packet inspection, things like that, and kind of traveling the world. I spent a lot of time doing emerging markets. So not only have I worked throughout, the US and Europe, but also through developing nations in Eastern Europe and Latin America, Africa, parts of Southeast Asia. So I've seen what big budgets can do. I've seen what small budgets can do, public sector, private sector. So it's given me kind of a unique exposure. And now today, I'm the CISO of Phosphorus Cybersecurity. We're an ex-IoT security company, so IoT, OT, and kind of everything that goes on with those embedded firmware-based devices. And I've been here for about 6 months. It's been great. Some really fantastic people. Some people that I've worked with for the last 20 years, and some great founders from places like Endgame and ISS X-Force as well. So it's a really interesting time in our industry for sure. And it changes and reinvents itself at least every 2 to 3 years, which is wonderful.
It sure does, and what a fascinating backstory. Let's just keep going right back then. What first got you interested in tech, I suppose?
Yeah, so it's funny. So I wrote about this a little bit in my first book, which was Enemy at the Water Cooler, which was about insider threats. And I had a little intro about sort of how I got into this. And it was really, in the early days, getting onto bulletin board systems and, reading things like the Anarchist Cookbook. I'm not even sure if that's even still around these days.
I
But
think
back
I
in
think
the day,
they banned it, didn't they? Yeah,
yeah, that was a big deal. You had to like
yeah.
read it on the cover with a flashlight. It was like, don't let anybody see it. All sorts of crazy stuff that if you probably built in your garage, you'd end up blowing your garage up. But that kind of got me into like electronics and hacking. The first thing I ever really hacked was a police scanner. And so I got for Christmas one year, I think I was 12, this little handheld police scanner from Radio Shack. And you could listen to police and fire, ambulance, things like that. It wasn't too fancy, but I found this schematic that said if I could take apart the daughter boards on it and desolder some diodes and clip some chips and put it all together without ruining
You could
anything.
you could talk back, couldn't you?
Well, I could listen to um, cordless phones, which were
Oh,
about 49 megahertz back then. This was pre mobile, pre cell
yeah.
phone, or wide adoption of them, anyways. So then I could listen to my sisters. I had two older sisters talk on the phone, and I could hear bidirectional communication. I was like, "This is amazing! This is the greatest thing in the world!" So it all started from eavesdropping on my sisters, probably talking to their boyfriends. I don't know,
Brilliant.
but that kind of planted the seed. And I took apart my parents' microwave, put it back together. Had a bunch of parts left over when I did that. Didn't put it back together very well. That didn't go over too well. But that kind of got me into that. And then, of course, playing with computers was a natural next step. My dad was an engineer, and we had an AT&T DOS based computer. And I wanted to play games with my friends. We had these 5.25-inch floppy disks, and they had copyright protection. So the first kind of software hacking was, how do I get around copyright protection so I can play Leisure Suit Larry? And if any
Yeah, I
listeners have
remember.
been around long enough, you probably remember that game, right? That was another very devious game. And that's how I got into the software side.
Do you know what? It's strange, isn't it? I've got bit of a repeat on the sound there. I don't know if that's you or me. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, the thing that got me into tech was my cousin had, I think it was a Commodore VIC-20, and he was learning how to program that at the time. And they
Yeah,
had tape decks, didn't they, at the time, the VIC-20s for the
yeah,
games. Yeah, and I remember getting one that Christmas, and then that's what started me on my love of technology, and it was always trying to improve things. Bit like you said, you obviously had a lot more joy than me. I just used to give everything back broken. I had the inquisitiveness and the desire to do it, but I didn't have the ability. Clearly,
I can't tell you how many hours I spent editing like auto exec bat files and config sys files to like make sure memory would load high with my mouse for different drivers, and I could boot up like a half a second faster if I just changed the ordering and things like that. Like, why? Why would I spend so much time with a stopwatch trying to get my computer to boot up faster? But that led to kind of really understanding basic programming, general systems operation, starting playing with modems at that time, getting to bulletin boards, and then, of course, eventually getting a shell account. Um, and playing around with you know, basic program, shell scripting, things like corn shell, really
yeah,
basic stuff. But yeah, it was fun, and we all kind of got our start somewhere. And it's so interesting because when I talk to people in the security field, not everybody kind of came up through the computer science angle. They we got people with backgrounds in philosophy and biology, and people that didn't go to college at all and just kind of were self-taught. And it's really a melting pot, especially if you look at the people that work in intelligence,
yeah.
cyber intelligence. They have such varied backgrounds. So I love that a eclectic nature of our field is really
I think
interesting.
it's super important to have that diversity. I mean, I've only been in this industry for 18 months, Brian. I ended up following the money is what I
Yeah,
did, and became
yeah.
very successful at following the money until I realized that the money wasn't making me happy, and I got a bit broken a few years ago because of the stress and pressure and having that life driven by ego, arrogance, greed, shiny things. I got really embroiled in that. And it's funny, when I had the opportunity, or was forced to have the opportunity at 45 to decide what I wanted to do next,
Yeah.
the choice was do something that gives me no stress and I don't have 75 staff to complain at me anymore. I could maybe a painter and decorator, get a van, go out to work, come home, or do something in technology. And that's back to that story about the Commodore VIC-20. Throughout my life, I've always kept up to date with tech. I've told this story before. When I had an office with, I think we had 73 at one point people working there, even though we had a managed service provider for the computer issues, I was still the one who used to get his hands on the computers because it's what I enjoyed. And I had no social media footprint because I've always had an issue with sharing stuff online, whether it's myself or my children. And ironically, everyone thought I was awkward a few years ago until the Cambridge Analytica story came out, where I felt thoroughly
Nice.
justified in what I'd been doing. And
Yeah.
I got kind of distracted and excited about the glamorization, I suppose, of pen testing side. So for me, breaking things, breaking into things, doing all these things that you shouldn't do, and then getting paid for it seemed to make a lot of sense to me. But again, I was never going to be, after failing it in my OSCP in 2020, I was never going to be a good tester. It isn't my skill set. And it's taken me to kind of stumble into a role in the industry that I do absolutely love, which is getting to learn and speak to people like you every day.
And that's fantastic you found that, because there's just so many disparate roles in this area that
Yeah.
people can tag onto, and you don't need to be the uber engineer programmer. I'm certainly not the world's greatest programmer, and I haven't programmed for a long time, but even at my best day, compared to the people I work with now, I've didn't can't even carry their water. So we
Yeah.
all have sort of our skill sets. But I remember when I first got interested in sort of you know kind of the pure computer, as we define computer hacking today. I was in college, and I was part of this group called this club, if you will, called hacks, the Hardware and Computer Knowledge Society, which we added because we wanted to call ourselves hacks. We figured out
Yeah.
what that meant later on. And we had this at our university. We had this really nice research lab with a whole bunch of computers donated from Sun Microsystems. So a bunch of Solaris operating systems and things like that, external hard drives, and all sorts of great things. And we couldn't get in there at night. And there was a motion detector in the room, and there was a security guard. And we wrote a program that would actually make the arm swing back and forth very quickly on the external connected hard drive. It would make the hard drive wobble and then eventually fall off the table, which would cause the motion detector go off. And then the security guard would have to run and see what's going on, what's happening in the
Brilliant.
room. And we wrote a cron job. So that happened every single evening at a little bit of a different time, but it happened every single evening. It would wobble off the table. And we just thought that was the coolest thing. And of course, it's ridiculous. It's the silliest and most useless thing ever. But at the time, it actually was pretty complicated to do. So that kind of got fun. And now I think till today, I have two daughters that are now in high school. But when they were younger, I would take them to DEF CON and Black Hat, and we would go to the lock picking camps and things like that. So they can pick handcuffs and they can pick the front door of the lock. I don't know if that makes me a good dad or a bad dad.
Yeah,
That's
that they are genuinely important life skills, in my
life
opinion.
skills,
Yeah,
right? If you're handcuffed, this is how you get out. But just exposing them to that and seeing how many kids are interested in this today,
yeah,
because
massive.
20 years ago, it first of all, there weren't really great resources.
No.
But now you're seeing they're really embracing this, and a lot of kids are interested. So it's going to be interesting what the next 20 years brings for young people that have grown up in this world, juxtaposed to people that kind of adopted it and helped shape it as it's grown.
I think you're talking about a different animal or a different beast being created moving forward. I mean, I've got how many is it? Two teenage children, sons,
Yeah,
and my 17-year-old is doing something called technology levels here in the UK, which is a new, recent, I think 2 years ago, introduced to try and give people in the first year a look at lots of different areas in technology, and then the second year, I think you can focus in on certain ones. And he's fallen in love with the security side, and I think he said half of his course want to be in cybersecurity. But the beauty of that, and if only I'd have listened to him, or this had happened a couple of years ago, they don't all want to be pen testers or SOC analysts because they've had a chance to look at all the different things in the industry. So my son loves coding, so he wants to get into the developer side and then developer security, whereas he's got friends who are more interested in the process side. I mean, there's just so many opportunities. And one of the things I complain about, which is a stupid thing maybe, is that there's too much choice out there for people with not much guidance for the masses at the moment, apart from some of these, I'm going to say it as I do every week, some of the nefarious boot camps who promise people 6-week courses that they'll be experts in cyber, which doesn't help.
yeah, that's pretty hard to take in. Well, I'll tell you. So, I live outside of San Francisco here in California, in Silicon Valley, if you will, and so there's a lot of people that work in this field.
Yeah,
Because of that, we have a lot of programs that kids can join to start learning Python. I think the youngest I've seen is about fourth grade, but
wow.
really it's designed for middle school and up. And they learn Python and they learn robotics and they start learning about cloud architecture and integration with APIs. So by the
Yeah,
time they graduate with high school, I'd argue that they're just as, if not more advanced in some cases, than some people graduating from a four-year college with a degree in computer science, just because
completely
it's
agree.
it's 100% hands-on,
Yeah,
laboratory-based, project-based, working your way up from really scratch, which is, very, very
yeah, yeah.
basic programming language for youngsters.
I can just about cope with that one.
Yeah, yeah. I can drag and drop the
I
modules.
can, yeah.
But they're extremely proficient in Python and full stack development by the time they graduate from high school. It's like, man, you can get a job at any one of these companies in the Bay Area now, making a really, really good salary without even going to college. So now we're starting to even see some people kind of step over that college level if they want to focus on tech, because it's maybe not seen as critical as it used to be. Some people would argue that's a bad thing. Some would say a good thing. I don't know. I guess we'll see how it plays
I,
out.
I
If you want
think I think in the UK and in the US, the education system needs a little bit of work. You've hit the nail on the head with regards to why these kids are getting to the point of being proficient at that age, and it's because they've got hands-on training. And it's as though we need to go back to the old apprenticeship days where you actually get your hands involved, and rather than the classroom solely based learning. I think I don't know. I know everyone learns differently, but I know here in the UK, it's you're not leaving school with all of the life skills. I mean, they don't teach you to pick handcuffs for one, which I think is a complete joke, Brian. They should really start doing that. But it's moving away from cyber. It's things like economics. Until you go to further education, you don't get any grounding in. You need money to pay bills, and this is what happens. And your credit rating is important, and why it's important to build up a profile on social media that is the right kind of profile. And I don't know. I think there's lots of gaps in that, and I don't want to start digging away into that hole because both of us will get in trouble if we comment too much. So
Yeah,
I'll jump straight into the chat.
yeah,
I noticed that Paul Cummings from Whole Cyber Human Initiative, I spoke to him earlier on today. IoT is a massive thing for him as well. He works for, I think it's Stevenson
uh-huh,
Technologies, and sent me a video earlier where they hacked a Philips, I think it was a Hue light bulb, and had that doing all sorts of things after about 5 minutes, which is completely scary. But he has
yeah.
asked a question there, Brian, with OT and now IoT becoming so in demand, what pet projects would you suggest seekers looking to tinker? Only ask because obviously some firmware tools are expensive. It's a good point.
Yeah. So I kind of define the term now, or the industry is starting to redefine this term as XIoT or extended IoT. Well, what does that mean? It means everything that we thought of was before, we just have a new term. So essentially, if we say IoT, we've got the consumer side, which are your Roomba vacuums and Ring doorbells and Hue light bulbs and LG washers and dryers and toasters and everything else. You've got the enterprise side, KVM switches, UPS, lights out management, HVAC, elevator control systems, printer, security cameras, so on and so forth. And there's some overlap between those two, but that's OT.
Yeah.
And then you've got, I'm sorry, that's IoT. And then you've got OT. OT is sort of the SCADA world, the industrial control systems, PLCs. These control robotic arms for batch and discrete manufacturing and power generation, water treatment, traffic. These very sort of ruggedized type devices in many cases. And then we've got sort of network devices, which we're all familiar with the routers, the switches, the wireless access points, the network attached storage, load balancers, all that world. Now, what makes all those things under one umbrella of XIoT is that they're purpose-built devices. They control light or flow, or they print stuff or record video or whatever the case. They have specialized hardware and software, right? So it might have the same capabilities as a laptop, but this thing only prints or this thing only records video. But
Yeah.
the final and most important piece of that puzzle is you can't put any kind of endpoint security on there. So you're not loading, your host-based firewall or host-based IPS or anti-malware solution on your printer or your camera in 99.999% of the cases. So you've got these purpose-built devices, and what we're finding is there's a lot. There's a lot of these devices now. To the question about how to start tinkering and playing with these things, man, this is something that we do at Phosphorus. We have a massive lab with thousands of different XIoT devices, everything from internet connected crock pots, which I didn't even know they had until I checked it out, and they do have massive 600-pound printers and SCADA equipment, and then network gear and everything that you can imagine in between. What's really interesting about these devices across the board, and we've analyzed now about 2 million plus across hundreds of customers globally. About 50% of the time in production, 50% of the time, the passwords on these guys are default. Now, sometimes the passwords, depending on the type of device, like audio video equipment, about 90% of the time, the passwords are default,
Yeah.
which means I don't need to hack anything. I just need to Google what the default password. And this will kind of blow your hair back a little bit, I think. So
It's all gone.
UPS, it already happened.
That's
Me
already happened. Yeah.
Me too. So UPS systems, uninterrupted power supplies. If the power goes out, they continue to power whatever you've got plugged in. Generally speaking, you have important things plugged into those. That's why you invest extra money in the UPS, or else you wouldn't buy the UPS. And there's small ones, there's big ones, etc. Well, the most popular sort of manufacturer, one of the most popular, is APC. APC has been making UPSs for a long time. Now, when we're in the field, we've looked at tons of UPS systems because they have their XIoT devices. Hazard a guess. What do you think the password is on APC UPS systems?
Password 123.
It's even worse. It's
Just
APC.
password. APC. Right.
It's APC username and APC password. And it's all in lowercase, and you could Google it. So I'm not sharing any secret sauce here. You can Google it and find it in just a few moments. We have a running joke that is, if we ever find an APC UPS system that does not have the default APC password, we'll buy everybody in the company a steak dinner. We've been eating a lot of chicken.
It's not going to happen, is it?
We've
You know,
yet to come across that.
it's funny
So
you
it's
should
funny.
say that
Yeah,
because
yeah.
we had at our old house, we had a lot of connected devices within it. So I think we had 75 hue bulbs, for example. We also had lots of different cameras up outside the property. And we were rummaging around in the drawers at the new house because when we moved, we just put everything in drawers and kind of moved it along a few years ago.
Yeah.
And two of the things we found were the old cameras. So I said to my wife, I wouldn't mind getting these set up again, but for different reasons. I want to look at the wildlife because we live in the middle of the countryside. I thought nighttime could be really exciting.
Oh,
So I got
sure.
these cameras out. I said, I've got no idea what the username and passwords are, though. I think it took about 45 seconds on Google Drive to find the default passwords that I'd clearly never changed 5 years ago
Yeah.
either. So,
They're never changed, and that's the other thing. So I said about 50% of the time the passwords are default. That other 50%, the passwords were probably changed once, and that was at the time of installation. And
yeah,
this is true across everything. This is true if I'm at a large financial services company, at a government agency, a power and energy company. Uh, one of the devices that we see hacked a lot, and this is just because they're uber promiscuous, are printers. And
yeah,
by promiscuous, what I mean is they want to connect with wired. They want to
yeah,
connect with wireless. They want to have Bluetooth on. You can connect through Telnet and SSH and HTTP and HTTPS because they want to be easy to use. Now,
yeah,
the bad guys know this. And the thing to remember about all these XIoT devices, it's not some esoteric operating system. They're running, generally speaking, Linux or Android or BSD, maybe a real-time operating system on the OT side like VxWorks or something of that nature. But these are common operating systems. And on top of that, they generally have the same network connectivity, power, ports, protocols, storage as a laptop.
yeah,
So essentially, these are little laptops, or in some cases even more powerful, like little servers sitting around. Again, 50% of the passwords on those are default. The other 50% have just been changed once. And this makes it even worse. What we're actually finding on these devices is the firmware, 26% of the time, is end of life. You can't even fix it. It's so old, you can't do anything with this. It's just end of life firmware. And the average age of the firmware is about 6 years old. So think about that. If I can't get in through the default password, chances are it's an old firmware version, like
yeah,
Ubuntu Linux version 10, which is like a decade old. We see a lot of that. And this firmware has tons of vulnerabilities, tons of level 8, 9, and 10 CVSS scores, and 10 being the most grievous, which means if I can't get into the default password with very limited skill,
yeah,
I don't have to be an Uber hacker at all. I can compromise those devices and get in. But this is what we're seeing the bad guys do now. They're actually starting to target these XIoT devices. And this became pretty clear. There was a tool created for the Russian FSB called Fronten. And Fronten was designed by contractors for the Russian FSB to find XIoT devices, compromise those devices, control those devices, and then use them for any number of things: data exfiltration, to attack IT assets, etc. Now, unfortunately for the Russians, the Digital Revolution Hacking Group got wind that they had built this tool. They actually stole it and they released it to the world, and you can download it on torrents. So if you can read Russian, you actually have a really nice nation state military quality XIoT hacking tool. And there's other
wow,
tools out there like that, but that was one great example. Um, China's another interesting case. So by far the most hacked devices out there, just across all of XIoT, and I'll share a couple examples, are security cameras
yeah,
because everyone's got them. No one's really sure who manages them. Is it physical security? Is it network ops? Is it the security team, a third-party vendor? It's like the end of Spider-Man. Everyone's pointing at it's you. No, it's who are you? And they're just trying to figure out who's to manage them. We were working with a company that had 25,000 security cameras, which actually isn't a huge number. We have companies that have many more. All of their security cameras had been compromised, and they were being used to mine cryptocurrency. And I'd love to say this was detected because they had a really spot on incident response team or a great SIM tool or they detected some traffic. No, their power bill went up by 300%. And for this company, that was a significant amount of money because when you mine crypto, it
yeah,
sucks a lot of power, right?
it
So if
does.
you think about it, these each camera was like a little desktop workstation. and they just compromised all of them, and they're using it for mining crypto. We've seen cameras that have been added to botnets and used to attack other devices. We've seen cameras used as pivot points to attack IT assets and all sorts of other things. But probably the most grievous, and I want to go back to China, is China started shipping cameras from Hikvision, Huawei, um, HKE, a few other versions that have actually been banned by the US government for use within government facilities and government contractors because they ship with the malware pre-installed out of the box. You just skip the middleman. You don't have to worry about being hacked. You're already hacked.
All I know with regards to the Chinese companies, and I'm not going to mention who it was I was speaking to earlier about
Yeah.
this, but they did some digging around into the companies that owned a lot of these technology providers where you buy on Amazon and eBay and get shipped over. And I think there was something like 5 or 6 shell companies behind each one that was clearly being used to obfuscate, the true ownership. And it's pretty obvious where that true ownership comes from, I think.
Well, we are playing around with a bunch of these, blacklisted devices, if you will, in our lab. And it was so blatant. So you would say stop, and they all recorded audio and video. So you'd say stop recording. It says okay. So I'll turn the green light to red, and it turns the green light to red. That's all it does. It just turns the green light. It's still recording video.
It's
It's
so
still
scary.
recording audio, and it's still streaming it to one of multiple sites. It's kind of like a Christmas tree turned upside down. There's multiple locations it feeds to, then they distribute down. Typical botnet architecture. But that's it. It was just recording everything. So what a great tool to spy on an individual for blackmail, to spy on an executive, a government official.
Who needs TikTok, huh?
Who needs it? You've got it in there already. And the great thing is there's tons of them.
Yeah.
No one's changed the password. And if they did, they haven't updated the firmware either, so it's easy to get in. So, and there's just lots of examples of these types of things. Another one that comes to mind was a casino in Las Vegas. I won't call it the casino name, but they have a massive fish tank, one of those fish tanks that's the size of 20 homes.
Yeah.
And they had some very specialized XIoT thermometers. And that's all they did. They just measured the temperature of the water. But they were internet connected and connected to their systems. Well, those thermometers got compromised remotely by an attacker who didn't want to kill a bunch of fish by raising the temperature. But he used that access point then to pivot to their IT network, and they got access to the high roller or the whale databases that are kept.
Lovely.
So
Lovely.
these are they're big spenders, right? They're special customers. They knew, their personal information, financial information.
What a blackmail list.
Yeah, what a blackmail list.
Is it wrong that that's the first thing I thought?
All from a thermometer. If you think of a casino or a hotel or even a retailer, you walk into any room and there's probably hundreds, if not thousands. I mean, most retailers today have several hundred. Big box stores have several thousand XIoT devices. We were working with a financial services company, and we noticed, oh, wow, you have a lot of biometrics and badge readers, CAC systems for physical access to your doors and interior and exterior doors. And that's great. So we took a look at what they had, and very quickly we found out, well, you did change the password, so that's good. But the firmware you have on these is almost 10 years old. And there's a level 10 exploit, which means with no authentication needed and very little skill, I can remotely take control of this device. And we showed them we can physically lock and unlock any door in your building, 6,400 locks, including the front door. We could unlock these doors or lock them at will, which is crazy. So all the application security and network security and data encryption, what good is that if I can just say unlock the door, walk in and walk out with your servers, right? So that's some of what we're seeing. And again, these are financial services companies. These are folks spending a lot of money on security, kind of the tip of the spear in many cases for investing in cyber. And they're still falling behind this new
after 25 years in financial services, I wish I could say I was surprised about that. I'm really not. While we're on that, I suppose you mentioned old hardware, old firmware, and a couple of the other people I've spoken to who work in the OT space, especially with regards to protecting critical national infrastructure.
Yeah.
One of the things that's come up is the age of a lot of what this stuff is built on. Yeah. And the main problem being, or one of the problems around that, is the talent pool who know how to secure these things and know how to use them is diminishing as people get older, and there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of talent coming in. Is that something you've experienced or you're concerned about, or have I got that completely wrong?
No, no, it is. I mean, so what's interesting about the industrial control system space is it's a unique environment where you can have very, very old systems. By very old, for very old in regards to technology, could be 2, 3 decades old. I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen a Windows NT 3.51 server, and God, I can't even tell you. I think Windows NT 3.51 was discontinued like 2000,
Yeah.
2000, quite a while ago. So this Windows NT 3.51 server was operating a multi-million dollar turbine. And the thing about it is, you don't depreciate turbines like you do a workstation. It's not going to get depreciated over 5 years and replace it.
No.
Depreciate it over decades because it's a big investment. And talk about a forklift move. It's literally a forklift to get it out and move it. So it and everything connected to it becomes part of one holistic solution. So we see that. And a lot of times these systems have their TCP IP stack, or maybe they talk Modbus or DNP3 or serial over Ethernet. And there's some older and newer types of protocols that aren't specific to TCP IP that they use for communication. Um, they're quite sensitive, right? So even if you did something as innocuous as a ping, I just want to see if this device is up, like a ICMP Echo Request 3. Are you up? It goes, oh, I don't understand what this ICMP packet is. I'm going to roll over and die. So it's very easy to crash these systems. And a lot of them are very simple digital systems that control physics. I control temperature, and I've got a set point. I can go as high as 75 and as low as 65. I control flow. I control volume. Mixtures, exposure to ultraviolet light. They're just very simple things. So when you're only doing 4 or 5 things, prudence dictates that it probably doesn't matter if I'm on Windows NT 3.51, operationally speaking, as opposed to something a little bit newer. It does these 3 or 4 things well. So they're just kept there. Now, the other side of this is they're ultra connected. They've got these protocols. A lot of them still have dial-up modems. They have
Yeah.
mobile phone apps that now you can control them with Bluetooth and Bluetooth Low Energy. So they're much more connected than a traditional computer. Now, I would argue that there's some stuff that's pretty esoteric out there that it's not even internet connected. It's old tech, and there's probably a very finite and shrinking populace that can manage those devices. So that's absolutely true. That reminds me of that movie, Space Cowboy with Clint Eastwood, when they
Remember
had
that.
some satellite that they built in the 60s and nobody else knew how to fix it because the code was so old. So they had to send these guys into space.
What a great analogy. I'm stealing that one. I'm stealing that one. Paul's
Right,
also
right.
Paul's dropped in there that they're requiring OT/ICS talent to have a 4-year electrical engineering degree to do cyber as well, as what he's experiencing at the moment. I know Paul comes from a military background and
Yeah,
learned his kind of hardcore skills there. But would
yeah.
you agree with that?
I think in some cases, yeah, it's always a mixed bag, right? Because there are talented people that you'll have that don't come from that background. But I don't think it's a bad idea to have very skilled individuals with a proven engineering background take point on this. Because when you think about confidentiality, um, integrity, and availability, the whole
Yeah.
CIA model. Um, on the OT side, it's almost all A. It's almost
Yeah.
all availability. Maybe a little bit on integrity, but it's almost all availability. You're literally keeping the lights on in some situations. So you want to have somebody that's in there that's going through a very deterministic process when they're making changes. It's not as willy nilly in the IT space. Well, it's not working. Let's just unplug it
Yeah.
or reboot it. So
Let's just restart that. Yeah.
yeah,
No.
you can't be as cavalier. You can't be as cavalier with these
No.
devices. They sometimes are more sensitive. But I think the biggest problem that I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this with across all XIoT, so the network devices, the OT side, and the enterprise IoT, is that a lot of folks don't even know what they have. And this includes the folks on the SCADA stuff, because sometimes there's so many devices. There's some kind of ruggedized device sitting in a shed out in the middle of the field somewhere that controls a dam, and then they're distributed as well. So
Yeah.
just discovering, and here's a fun fact. What we find working with all these companies is there's about 3 to 5 XIoT devices per employee. So in general, a 10,000 person company has between
Well,
30 to 50,000 XIoT devices. Now, when we go in and we say, Mr. Customer, How many XIoT devices do you think you have? Just give us a
About
ball.
10.
Well, if they tell us they have 5,000, in my mind, I know they're going to be 40 to 60% off. So I know it's probably
Yeah.
10. So they say 5, I hear 10. Now, there's a bit of a bell curve to that. So if I'm a law firm, that's probably going to be a little bit smaller, right? If I'm a retailer, it's going to be quite a bit larger. So like we work with some very large retailers that also have food services,
Yeah.
and even their ovens, their microwaves, their deep fryers, it's all connected. It's all being monitored. Plus door locks and cameras and scanner systems and warehouse. I mean, they're a cornucopia of XIoT.
Yeah.
And then you get into the industrial control systems, which half of the business is sort of on the PLC, SCADA, industrial control system, HMI kind of side of the world. Then they've got everything else protecting that with KVM switches and lights out management, etc. So there's this huge wealth. And and the thing that seems to be getting people when we're seeing a lot of these attacks, it's the systems that help you manage systems that are being attacked. So
Yeah.
what I mean by that is I'll use two examples here. There's KVM switches, which are, it stands for keyboard, video, and mouse. So I
Yeah.
have this physical switch. I have one keyboard, one monitor, and one mouse plugged in. And it's just plugged into 10, 20 different physical servers. So I don't have to have 20 monitors. They've been around forever. Unfortunately, no one's ever updated the firmware on these things. So they ship with the same firmware today as they did 10, 15 years ago, loaded with vulnerabilities. So if you can get access to that KVM switch, that gives you access now to all the devices it's connected to. Lights out management is very similar. The difference of lights out management is if you flip a server around, it's going to have this thing that looks like an Ethernet port. Well, all
Yeah.
that Ethernet port actually is, it's a little Linux server. And by connecting to that, which again, passwords are always default on these guys, old firmware, lots of vulnerabilities, I can spawn a remote terminal. I can have a shell connection. Some of them have virtual terminals with applications where you can actually upload software, change network settings, reboot. Basically, you have full access to these systems, but no one's controlling them. So why bang my head against the front of that device with firewalling and encryption and application security and identity and access management and the hundreds of millions of dollars that this organization spent on cybersecurity? I
Yeah.
just go through this back door and access. Another big one is racks, like racks and people have their computers in there and it's connected to UPS, and maybe there's temperature control, tamper management, cable management, all these different things. Those are never updated because to update the firmware, you have to reboot them. And to reboot
Yeah.
them, you have to reboot everything that's in there. So they just never schedule the downtime. So a lot of the bad guys now are getting in through these. And there was recently an attack called Quiet Exit. And this was announced by Mandiant, I believe a month, maybe 2 months ago, within the last 60 days. And this was really novel. Attackers got in to these companies, we think, through a basic phishing attacks. And they get into someone's laptop, for example. So a phishing attack, I got into Steve's laptop. Once I'm there, I don't want to stay on Steve's laptop because he probably has endpoint security and it's being monitored. And if I'm doing something malicious, it might get detected. So as soon as they got access to an IT asset, they started looking for XIoT devices. In this case, they were looking for wireless access points. They were looking for load balancers, network access control, or network attached storage rather, and voice over IP phones, printers, all these things that we consider sort of network gear and IoT. So they'd get on these devices. Once they got on these devices, they installed a reverse SSH tunnel, very common, drop bear, which they reconfigured and recompiled to run on BSD or Android or the Linux flavors that were already running. So now they can control these XIoT devices. So they got in through a phishing attack on IT, pivoted to XIoT, installed some code. Now they're controlling it remotely. Once there, they started making API calls to the local exchange servers, as well as the exchange servers for that company in the cloud, so Office 365. And they were exfiltrating all of the sensitive information, all of the emails. This is the big deal about it, though. In most cases, it wasn't detected for over 18 months
My
because no
God.
one's watching these devices. No one's monitoring. So it's a great way, and they know this, to maintain persistence and evade detection. A fancy way of saying, you can't see me and you're not going to notice anything I do. And it
How
works.
how are you ever meant to know how much you've lost from that? Is it traceable? So it's
You can
18
look
months
at the
later.
API calls and that, and they did trace it back. They were found out that they were particularly going after C-level executives and people that worked in business development and M&A.
Yeah.
So they were trying to say, okay, company A is about to buy
So
company.
you then, Brian.
So, what's interesting is, when Phosphorus started, we started this company about 5 years ago. It was in stealth mode until last year. So we basically built a framework that allowed us to communicate with XIoT devices, because you can't scan these devices. We talked about that earlier. You're going to knock them over and kill them, whether that's a SCADA device or some of these traditional enterprise devices. You can't scan. You can't sniff traffic either, because that doesn't give you enough information. So what we do is we actually communicate. And I tell people, think about Star Wars with C3PO. C3PO could speak like a million languages, even the language of water evaporators, right? And that was initially why he was purchased. So what we did was we built this abstraction layer that allows us to communicate with all these disparate XIoT devices, stuff that's crazy old to crazy new to crazy esoteric. And about 90% of all the devices we see when we're at a customer site, we already have categorized and fingerprinted, and we know what those devices are. And
Wow.
every time we do new proof of values with customers, we find more and we add more. It's never going to be 100% because there's always some weird whiz bang XIoT thing. It's much different than the IT world. So we built this technology that could essentially identify what all these devices are. So now you have a great asset inventory. It can log into them and actually say, hey, this is your model number. This is what firmware you have. Do you have a default password, or has the password been changed? Are you running your passwords through a password management tool like a CyberArk or Thycotic or HashiCorp? What ports and protocols do you have open? Are you running clear text? Are you running encrypted? Are your certificates out of date? All these kind of meat and potatoes things. And what I tell people is XIoT security today is kind of like IT security in the mid 90s. We were saying, well, we got to figure out what we've got and maybe make a Visio diagram of it. We have to figure out a good password policy to manage the passwords. We've got to update and patch our software, and we've got to harden these devices and turn off ports and protocols we don't need.
Yeah.
That's what Phosphorus does. So Phosphorus discovers all these devices, communicates with them in a very safe, very scalable way. So you can have hundreds of thousands of different types of devices, helps you rotate the passwords automatically on all these different things, store them securely encrypted in your PAM, updates all the firmware, which is awesome because now you can get in the latest versions of firmware, and you can start hardening. Turn off Telnet, turn off wireless, turn off Bluetooth, just run SSH, whatever your policies might be, and then of course manage your certs. Those four basic things are kind of what it does at scale, and it works in the OT world with all the SCADA devices because nothing's being scanned. There's no vulnerability testing. There's no malformed packets. It's just talking to the devices the way they're meant to be spoken to.
So going off
Yeah.
tangent or off script, I suppose a little bit.
Yeah.
If they're genuine interest, do you your end client then is that the end consumer or is that other cybersecurity providers?
Yeah, it's the end consumer right now. We are working with some cybersecurity providers, but essentially, an oil and gas company would buy us, a bank, an airline, a retailer, a hotel chain, whatever the case might be. Let's use a hotel chain as an example. We work with a major hotel chain. It's got international footprint. They have over 75,000 printers, just printers,
Yeah.
and they're all different types and models and versions and things like this. And I can tell you, I've got a printer about 3 feet away from me right now. And if I was to go out and decided I wanted to update the firmware on this thing, it's about 5 years old, so I'm sure it's out of date. I'd have to look up what's this model number, and I have to Google it and try to find that firmware and hunt it down. And okay, now what's the process to update it? It'd probably take me a good hour,
Yeah.
right? And I do this kind of for a living, so it's a pain in the butt. Now multiply that by 10,000, 50,000, 75,000 printers of different flavors, plus cameras and door locks and HVAC control systems and elevator systems and everything else. It was just untenable.
Yeah.
There wasn't like another way to do it. You're not going to have a team of engineers armed with paper clips to hit the reset button in the back of all these things and try to update them. So we said, what a great solution would it be if people could patch and manage credentials, harden and do all these other things across all their different devices. All the firmware for that is kept encrypted, cryptologic checksums, encrypted in storage and transit, in a cloud. So you don't have to go searching for anything. And you can say, update all my printers that are in the UK, or update all printers that are HP version 123, or all blah, blah, blah. So you can start tagging these things and updating them at certain cycles. Now rotate the passwords every 90 days, for example. And it's smart enough to say that, hey, you know what? This piece of SCADA equipment, it can only take a 4-digit PIN. and it has to be numeric. It can't even use upper lowercase letters, special characters. This security camera can use anything except for a hash sign. This device, the password can only be 10 characters long. It can't be 9, it can't be 11. We've seen all sorts of weird requirements for these devices. So it really helps address that. And there's this little dark secret in the XIoT world which makes this so necessary. Most vendors that make these types of devices, they're not they're not security focused. They're trying to get a product out that does a certain set of things for their customers with the right bells and whistles. So because of that, when somebody comes in to build their code, a lot of times they're sharing their grab share libraries or some
Yeah.
kind of white labeling, and they're pulling that in. And that's fine. That happens in all businesses. But because there's no security development lifecycle, that means that the vulnerability that exists on my voice over IP phone could be the exact same vulnerability that I have on my AV equipment or my printer because of
Yeah.
all these shared libraries. We saw a major voice over IP phone vendor that shipped production code with their phones with undocumented SSH access with a default password. They didn't even realize they were running SSH on their phones, let alone have a password. It just happened to be from a shared library they used. They didn't even have the wherewithal to say, well, let's at least do a port scan our own device and figure out what it's running. Go, oh, why do we have port 22 open? But it just kind of puts you in the mindset of these vendors, right? A lot of them work in agriculture or they work in other areas where this isn't their primary focus.
No,
So having
absolutely.
something that can go out there and say, hey, let's update, let's rotate the passwords, let's secure these things was just needed. And again, it's table stakes. This is 1995 IT security being applied to
Yeah.
2022, XIoT.
It's crazy. And you mentioned the word, the life cycle where, I mean, the whole shift left thing, right? So you said you're from the Bay Area. Had visited San Francisco first time this year. Came to the RSA conference. Had an amazing time. What a beautiful city you live in. It's a fantastic. How many buzzwords did I see at that conference though? How many times did I read shift left? And me not being a complete techie, I still understand enough that most of these companies that are saying shift left aren't really shifting that far left at all. In fact, they're shoving
Yeah.
it all in and then scanning it afterwards, which to me seemed, from an outside perspective, seemed a little bit crazy. Got to be honest with you. And
Yeah.
everything you've just been talking about, it's like having a conversation with the CEO of Bramfit Lewis. So I'm going to introduce you afterwards, not for any
Oh,
reason other than I think you two will get along like with a house on fire, because they do a lot of IoT work. They look after, I think it's 60% of the smart meter grid in the UK. They do lots of
yeah.
other work within national infrastructure. And it's the same kind of issues coming up that you've been talking about just now. So again,
Smart
off on
ships,
tangent a
smart
bit.
buildings, smart cities. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
we're
it's
seeing
just
it all.
nightmares waiting to happen. There's a question come up. I know we've only got a few minutes left, so I want to just go back to that. And I'm
Yeah.
squinting because I'm nearly 50 and can't see very well. Here we go. Greg, good to see you in here. Greg's from Intasso, recruitment firm over there in the US. Your interest in cyber startups is awesome. Is there a particular size or series you focus on when looking for your next gig, or are you all about the technology product they offer?
Oh yeah, really great question.
It
Um,
is. Thanks, Greg.
so interestingly enough, Greg, when I joined Phosphorus, I was looking for just companies to invest in. I wasn't even necessarily looking for a company to join. I just was in the process of selling my last company off to Google, and I was like, okay, I'll just kind of sniff around. But what I always look for is the market ready, right? I don't necessarily want to join a company that the market will be ready in 10 years, maybe. If I wanted to be in that space, I'd become like Intel, where I'd build a fab and dig a hole in the ground, and to get technology to build something that people might want a decade from now. So
Yeah.
I look for things that I think the market's ready for, and then I look at the management team. Is it blessed? Is it somebody that's been there, done that before? And some people like to try with a net new team. I've been fortunate to work with sort of a very similar group of investors and executives throughout my career. So I try to find, people that know people and kind of stay in that world.
Yeah. It's
But most important,
relationships built on trust, isn't it?
built on trust and
Yeah.
kind of, we've been through the trenches together and we know when times are good and times are bad, how we're going to react. But really that market readiness. And then of course it has to have amazing solution. If I can't get behind something, there's no way I'm going to invest. In fact, I fell in love with Phosphorus so much. I said, I don't just want to invest here. I actually want to join the company. I want to take on an operational role, and met the CEO and the CTO, the co-founders, and just amazing guys. They helped start. They were the founders of Endgame and ISS X Force, and
Oh wow.
built some really great labs and companies in their history. Just fantastically brilliant folks. But the idea behind this, I also look for something that's unique. So I don't want to be a Me Too firewall. I'm a new firewall, or I'm a new IPS, or I'm a new SIM. There's a lot of that.
Yep.
There's not a lot of
An awful lot of that at RSA. Yeah.
right. I don't want to be the new version. I want to be something that's actually different and unique, a unique
Yeah.
space. And I've tried to do that throughout my career. So I guess to condense that, what I look for again, market timing, management team, and a product that I really believe in, and I have to understand.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you about all the companies I built or helped build. Riptech, ArcSight, Imperva, Solera, Verodin, all these companies that I've been involved with. Phosphorus is the first company I've ever done that I can explain to my baby boomer parents what I do, and they actually understand for the very first time. I get it. We
I
know what
think
a
it's got to be more about how you explain it, because I've got an elderly baby boomer mum who hasn't got a clue what I'm talking about.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, but no, that was a great question, and it's you know, it seems funny, but when those three things come together, it's
Yeah.
it's your you if you take the right steps. I found that you can make the company a success, but it has to be something that's actually adding value to the customer.
So
I
I
really
suppose the next question following on from that is,
yeah.
I know you're working with Phosphorus at the moment, but are you looking for opportunities at the moment?
Yeah, I'm always looking for opportunities to
Yeah.
invest. There's what's really interesting about this space is XIoT is a very broad term. It's almost like saying encryption, right? What does that
Yeah.
mean? It could mean a lot of things. I was just in the UK a few months ago. I'm actually going back again in a couple weeks. And if you think back, I think the first unofficial IoT device was uh, on ARPANET, and it was a Coke machine in the late 80s. It was on ARPANET, and it said how many cans of Coke are left in the machine. Okay, kind of cool. The first official IoT device was in the mid 90s, and that was actually an internet toaster. Still not that practical. But we have the first IoT smart city, which is Dublin, Ireland. Um, in about 25 years, we went from a toaster to a whole freaking city. So it just tells you how quickly the space is expanding. So I think anybody that's out there that's looking at things like smart ships, smart buildings, smart cities, smart whatever, this is the new, and the XIoT devices are outnumbering both endpoint and cloud by a massive
They
and
are.
growing margin.
It's really funny you mention Ireland as well, because they're at the forefront of drone deliveries as well here in the UK.
Right?
I
It's
read up.
amazing.
Yeah, they're already doing trials, I think, for medication. So from pharmacies, prescriptions,
Well,
etc.
I'll tell
Brilliant.
you this: if you build, if you have we'll just say smart city. If you have a smart city, it's almost like saying I have internet, because atop that you can build all these other capabilities:
Yeah,
drone delivery, enhanced traffic management systems, safety and emergency response. Everything is kind of built on top of that, just like everything's built on top of the internet.
yeah,
So I think they're really kind of the leading the forefront. They're the model of the world. But with that, you can't have light without dark, good
no,
without evil. There's going to be people that are trying to exploit that. And the scary thing about this world is it might not just steal financial information or healthcare data. You could cause destruction and hurt people. So if things are tampered with. So this is the way we're going. The genie's out of the bottle. We're moving this way. But it's unfortunate that we're still stuck in a 1995 mentality when it
yeah,
comes to security about these devices. So we have to close that gap. And because that gap has to be closed, there's a lot of opportunities, I think, in there for cybersecurity companies to step up and say, okay, this is a big problem. This is the piece we're going to address, right? This is
yeah.
how we're going to help fix this.
I completely agree, and I suppose being from the UK, I should have a big shout out to Ireland for being at the forefront, because the rest of the UK isn't at the forefront of anything apart from an energy crisis at the moment. Let's not get political, Simon. That'll ruin your career. remember my mother telling me that about 40 years ago. We're out of time, Brian. Couple of things. Firstly, thank you so much. It's been ever so insightful. Secondly, I might have something that interests you with regards to a firm who are potentially looking for some investment. So I will catch up with you off camera about that. I don't want to start talking about that on the live stream. Again, to everyone who's tuned in, massive thank you for making this as interactive and engaging as it has been. Brian, any final words from you before we wrap things up?
No, thanks so much for having me on the show and talking about this topic. I know for a lot of you, I was seeing all the messages come through, and for people that watch your show, I think they understand this is an issue.
Yeah.
We just need to get it out to the rest of the world and start addressing this, because this is the next big thing. And I think if you walk around RSA in the next couple of years, everyone's going to have XIOT as their buzzword, because they're starting to figure it out. So
I'm going to
thanks so much
start
for
laying bets on what the buzzwords will be in the next 2 or 3 years. I think it could be an interesting book, couldn't it? But
for
everyone,
sure.
thank you so much for tuning in. If you really are gluttons for punishment and you want more of this, in 3 hours' time, I'm going live again with Which Cyber Pathway, where we talk about, I suppose, some of the gatekeeping and issues that people are coming across while trying to break into the industry. And today we've got Patrick Gillespie coming on the show. So do tune in for that. I'll play us out with a quick stinger for that event. Everyone, Brian, thank you. It's been amazing. See you soon.
Bye bye.